that song there, it was talking about the burden of my heart was rolled away. And, every one of us have different burdens from time to time. And if you don't have any, let me know how you can get by with that. Because, and I'll give you some of mine. You can have some of them because, there's different seasons in life, and there's different burdens you carry. And but I'm glad that we can take every one of our burdens to Jesus, and He's able to take care of them. I'm glad there's nothing that He can't do, and I'm thankful for that. And as we look into the Word of God tonight, as you can see, the title up there is Jesus Works in All Situations, and that's what's on my heart tonight. Is each of us carry different situations from day to day, from week to week, and I'm glad that God is God in every one of them. Luke chapter number 7, and as I was studying this, we just came out of the Sermon on the Mount, where He had instructed them and gave them a lot of stuff to look at last week, and again, it was some harsh things that He told. He was very, very specific about the way some things were, and then there was many people there that was listening to Him. And then He's leaving there, and He still has some of the same crowd with Him. And we'll start here in verse 1 of chapter 7. Now when He had ended all His sayings in the audience of the people, He entered into Capernaum. And as you remember, he gave them a whole lot of information right here in the last chapter on how to act and where to build your house. And the fact is of not trying to get the speck out of your brother's eye when you got a log in yours. So again, he had absolutely given some instructions here, and I'm glad God has given us very specific instructions on everything that we are to do. But here He is headed over to Capernaum, and we're going to run an encounter. The first thing I want to look at, Jesus works in all situations, and He's going to work here in sickness. And as we get into this here, there is a multitude of people following Him, and He's heading His way into Capernaum. But there's 3 or 4 different people in this story here that I want you to take a look at. And everybody doesn't want the same thing from Jesus. Everybody ain't in it for the good for everybody else. And as we see here, it doesn't necessarily matter where you start, because the centurion here that we're going to start to study on, he was a Roman centurion. The Romans in general weren't very nice to the Jews, but this one had more compassion than the rest of them seemed to have, and we'll see that as we get in there. But it doesn't matter where you start. It really matters where you finish up and what you do with Jesus. Because again, don't tell me that, hey, I didn't have the best home life in the world, or I didn't have the privileges that some other people have. It doesn't matter where you start at. It's where you end up, and what you do with Jesus. And we'll see here as we pick this up, the centurion here in verse number 2, and a certain centurion servant who was dear unto him and was sick and ready to die. So again, the centurion here, most of the time the big, the leaders of men don't have compassion on the privates. If we talk about in our army, a general wouldn't have much compassion on a private or a below private, or he may not have compassion on them. Hey, their job is to do what I tell them to do, and that's all they care about. But this centurion was different. He cared about the servant. The Bible doesn't say what the servant did for him, but with just the order of things here, the centurion was up here and that servant was down here in the caste, or the pecking order, so to speak. But for some reason, this centurion's heart was much more inclined to this servant, and he said it was dear to him. And if you've got somebody that you care about, somebody that's dear to you, you have more concern with them with what they're going through. I have a concern for you as the people of Bethany Baptist Church, as church members, as fellow Christians. I have concern for you, what you're going through. And when we have concern, we will carry things to Jesus. We will take our burdens. I bestowed that upon you tonight to pray for my son, and we will carry that. And and again, we can have part in whenever something is when the prayer is answered. But here, this servant, was sick, and he said he was ready to die. So I believe if Jesus didn't intervene here, that servant might not have made it the rest of that day or that week. And you may be in a situation, you may not be physically dying, but you may have a situation where you feel like it's at the end of everything, and if Jesus doesn't step in, I'm not going to be able to make it. But I'm glad. If we pick up here in verse 3, and I'm glad God puts these words in here that maybe it doesn't do anybody else any good, it sure does me some good. And here, and when he heard of Jesus. I'm going to read that to you again. This is a centurion here. When he heard of Jesus. You know why we should be talking about Jesus and the greatness and the goodness of God? You never know who might hear. You never know who might be listening that you don't have any idea that they're even paying you the least bit of attention. This centurion here wasn't at church. He wasn't in the synagogue. He was about his business keeping the Jews in order with all of his men. But somehow God allowed him to hear of Jesus. He said, hey, them people over there, they don't care anything about him. But all of a sudden they hear you talking about him, and they say, hey, why are they happy about that? Why do they talk every time they have a problem? The world will come around, they'll start complaining about it. Hey, I've got this going on and this going on, everything's against me. Then along comes a Christian that says, yeah, I've got this and this going on, but you know what I did? I prayed, and I read my Bible. And you know what else? My church family was praying for me when I couldn't pray for myself. And you know what? They heard of Jesus. So that made a difference in that centurion's life, because he had a situation he couldn't fix. Because when you're the leader of men, you are going to try to fix everything. And, as we see here in a little bit, when he tells somebody to go do something, you know what that member of his army did? They went and did it. They didn't ask any questions. They went and did it because, they were going to obey what he said. But he had heard of Jesus. And he sent unto the elders of the Jews, beseeching him that he would come and heal his servants, beseeching, imploring. Let me give you that here. Making an earnest or desperate appeal. You ever been there? Whenever you just didn't see a way. And you know what? Whenever we get to that shape, we'll get down to business with God. We won't say, now lay me down to sleep prayer. You'll get down on your hands and knees and be out prone before God and say, hey, God, I can't handle it. And that's where the centurion was here. He didn't know. He had never been to Sunday school. He had never been inside of a church, more than likely, but he had heard of Jesus. And he said, hey, the leader of these Jews here, the elders of the Jews, who is this Jesus? I need him to heal my servant. And you know who those elders of the Jews more than likely were? Them Pharisees and scribes and all them ones that give Jesus a fit all this time. That was the ones that he went to, because they were the leaders of the church. They were the ones who were giving Jesus a hard time. So what did them scribes and Pharisees do? They went to find Jesus. But they didn't go to get him this time to fuss at him because he was healing on the Sabbath, or he was doing things that they thought was against the law and all this other stuff. They went after Jesus because this centurion was important to them. And let me give you this here. The centurion was the important one in this scenario for the elders of the Jews. It wasn't the servant that was sick. So be careful when you see people that come and need something from you, because what is their motivation? I'm going to come back to the centurion, but I want to give this to you right here about those elders of the Jews right here. Look at verse 4. And when they came to Jesus, they besought him. Again, another version of beseech, imploring him, making an earnest plea, saying, if this is not the religious crowd, I don't know what is. Because they came not because the servant was sick like the centurion had, and hey, I'm coming because I've got compassion on somebody, the wheels have run off and things are bad here. They came because the master here was a man that done something for them. They didn't want the servant healed for the right reason. You say, what are you talking about? Let's look at the rest of that verse. And they came to Jesus, they besought him instantly, saying that he was worthy of whom he should do this. The centurion was worthy. Not that the servant was sick, but those Jews were worried about the centurion, because he's worthy that you should do this. Let me tell you, none of us are worthy for God to step by and, step into our lives. But they're saying, hey, he's worthy, for he loved, verse 5, for he loved our nation, and he hath built us a synagogue. Oh, absolutely, the centurion did a great thing there. He paid for their synagogue, and there's nothing wrong with that. But let me tell you, the centurion right here was still a lost man. He just now heard of Jesus, and he had built him a synagogue before, so he was a good man. But a good man or a good woman won't get you to heaven. It takes the blood of Jesus to get to heaven. And here, these people that should have knew better was saying, hey, you need to come and heal him, Jesus. Come on over here and heal him because of who his master is. And how bad that is if you get thinking about it, that they were more concerned about what they could get out of it and what their advantage was, because Jesus might heal that servant. But hey, they might use that as leverage to get something else, maybe get another synagogue or something else that ruler could do for them in this life. They missed the whole thing about, hey, what's eternal is far more important than what you get in this life. But I'm glad that didn't change who the centurion was and what God was going to do for him here in this servant. Verse number 6, and then Jesus went with them, and when he was not far off from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying, Lord, trouble not thyself, for I am not worthy that thou should enterest under my roof. Let me tell you, the centurion right there, he had already understood. He had heard about Jesus, but Jesus was already working on him. He said, hey, I'm not worthy for you to come into my house. I'm not worthy for you to do anything for me. God, I'm not worthy tonight for you to answer any of my prayers the rest of my life. Talking about me. He said, hey, I'm just not worthy for you to come. So that shows a humbleness there, because again, he was high up. And he said, hey, I'm not worthy for you to come by, Jesus. He was already getting himself in the place where God could use him. Where we can be used whenever we humble ourselves and get down and get to business with God, God can use us. He can't use us whenever we're trying to, hey, look, what can Jesus do for me? What can you do for me? What can I get out of it? Like the Jews were here. We said, hey, I'm not worthy. So you're not worthy. I'm not worthy for you to come to my roof. But Lord, he had some faith. Verse number 7, wherefore neither thought I myself worthy to come to thee. You know what? If we really got that we're not worthy to come to Jesus, but because of his blood at the cross where I first saw the light, that's the only reason we're worthy at all, is because of what he did for us. Because he laid down his life, and because his blood's on my heart, I'm worthy to come stand before him because of who he is. And that's what he's saying. Hey, I'm not worthy to even come to you, Jesus. I'm not even worthy to bow down at your feet. But I'm glad that, when he had heard about Jesus, he got a hold of something, because what's it say in the last part of this verse? He said, but say a word. But say in a word. Oh, what a blessing that is. Say in a word. What faith that is. Just say a word. And my servant shall be healed. He said, just say the word, Jesus, and my servant will be healed, because you don't even have to be in the same room with him, and I believe that you can heal him. He said, hey, God, I'm going to pray, and you just say the word, it'll happen. There's been several times in the Bible, if you read through that, he said a word, he never even entered in the house, and he healed them. But you know what? We relate things back to what we know. And this centurion here, because again, in verse 8, I've read over that, and for the longest time I didn't understand why in the world would the centurion say this to Jesus. But this is what the centurion knew. And it says here in verse 8, for I am a man, I also am a man set under the authority, having under me soldiers. And I say unto one, go, and he goeth, and to another, come, and he cometh, and to my servant, do this, and he doeth that. That relates right back there to verse number 7, when he says, but say in a word. And the centurion here is saying, Jesus, I understand your power. I understand you've got, sickness, death, and everything else is in subjection to you, Jesus. And the only way I can relate that to you, Jesus, because I don't understand that power and be able to say a word and it happens, but I understand that's what you can do, Jesus. You can heal my servant with just saying a word. But let me tell you how I relate it to you, so I can understand it, being the centurion. Because if I tell my soldier boy here to go over there and stand in the corner, you know what he's going to do? He's going to go over there and stand in the corner. If I tell him to run around the building, you know what he's going to do? He's going to run around the building, because that's the power in my word over this army. But I'm so glad, Jesus, you got a better word. You got a word whenever you say, hey, let the sickness be gone, it'll leave. You don't have to come under my roof for my servant to be healed. You just say the word, Jesus. I understand what that means, because you've got the power. And no matter what you say, the devils have to flee, the sickness goes away, all this. I've heard all of this, and I understand that because who you are. And just you say a word. Ain't you thankful tonight whenever Jesus just says a word in the middle of our suffering? In the middle of our trial, just in the middle of it, he can just say a word. Remember he said, peace be still. And what happened to the waters? They laid down, and I believe it was smooth as glass out there on that water when he said, peace be still. I talked to, by text, you remember I asked prayer for Miss Crystal about a month ago that had the surgery with the Ephesians. I talked to her husband today by text. I hadn't reached out to him because you just never know when to. It's just you just don't know. I hadn't heard anything. He said, I should have sent you a message a long time ago. That tumor was benign, and she's fine. You know what? Jesus spoke a word in that situation. There's been times that he just spoke a word, and all of a sudden the problems are gone. But because of the faith, sometimes our faith is weak. Sometimes my faith is weak. Let me just speak for me. Sometimes my faith is weak. But Jesus here, we've already looked at elders of the Jews and what they wanted. We saw what the centurion wanted. Hey, the servant needed healing. The servant probably didn't even know this was going on. But I'm glad when the centurion said that. Look at verse number 9. And when Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him and turned him about and said unto the people that followed him, I say unto you, I have not found so great a faith, no, not in Israel. And when they were sent, returning to the house, found the servant whole that had been sick. You know what? The power in the word of Jesus, all of a sudden things are just better than they've ever been. And I believe when the centurion said, just say a word, that servant was healed right then because his faith. And you know what else? I believe that centurion was saved because he believed on the Almighty Lamb of God. Doesn't say anything about a sinner's prayer. I just believe he was saved there by his faith. Yeah, that's what we got to do, by the faith. So it works in that situation. But I want you to see it's not only when there's sickness that Jesus will work. Look here at verse 11. Changing stories. Same day. But it came to pass the next day, the day after, that they went into the city of Nain. And many of the disciples went with him, and much people. That same crowd was still following Jesus because, they just saw something right there, so they were going to follow him. This was about 25 miles away from what I understand. And when they come nigh to the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and much of the city was with her. I want you to contrast the two different parties that were happening here. Jesus and his crowd, they just came from seeing the centurion's servant healed and hearing about that. I doubt they were sad. I figure they were rejoicing because they were with Jesus. You can't be sad around him. And they were coming into the city, and coming down the road the other way was a mom. And that day and time, and probably this day and time, there's not a much worse situation that a mom could be in than be a widow and her only son was dead. I don't think there was much rejoicing as they were headed towards Jesus. No doubt they were sad and probably just completely distraught. And there's going to be times in your life when you're completely distraught. It doesn't necessarily have to be a death. It could be anything. Insert whatever problem, whatever burden that you had right there. Insert it there, and you're coming down the road. This widow hadn't spent time in prayer. She may have prayed before her son died, doesn't say. But she hadn't been at church and been praying and saying, hey, Jesus, come by and take care of this situation. The Bible doesn't teach that. But God's got an appointed time to meet each of us in our circumstances. I don't know what it is. I can't give you the time frame when Jesus is going to come by, and that stuff that you've been praying for, that stuff that's been bothering you. I can't tell you when you're going to walk around that corner and right there you're going to meet Jesus head on, but that's what happened to this widow woman. They were carrying her son, her only son, out there, and they were on the way to the cemetery. They were going to bury him because he was in the briar there was an open coffin, for lack of a better description. There wasn't a top on it, so it was open. But I'm so glad, thank God, for the times that all of a sudden I'm just distraught and I don't know which way to go, and all of a sudden I meet Jesus head on, coming to help me. And I hadn't spent time in prayer, I hadn't spent time reading, but he knew that I needed his help, and he's right there on time. He'll be right there on time even when you can't get it out and you can't do anything for yourself. All of a sudden there he comes down the road. Because when Jesus passed by, things pick up. When Jesus passed by, things change. When Jesus passed by, he saw her. I'm so glad Jesus saw her in her condition right there before he ever got to her. You know what he did? He had compassion on her for what she was going through. That Jesus will see you right where you're at right now, and he has compassion on you right where you're at. But I'm glad for the times when Jesus has compassion and he does something immediately. Because he said, hey, weep not. Look here, verse 13. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said, weep not. You ever been there when all of a sudden Jesus comes by and said, hey, I'm taking them tears. I'm going to take them from you. Hey, you've cried a many a tear over whatever that situation is. You've cried, and all of a sudden Jesus shows up and said, hey, I'm taking them from you today. You don't have to cry over this situation no more. You don't have to cry about it. You don't have to worry about it. I'm taking it today. And he's the God of right now. And he came and touched a briar. He wasn't supposed to do that. The law says you can't touch a dead body. Read over there in the law. If you in the Jewish tradition, if you touched a dead body, you had to be outside the camp for a while. But you know what? I think he wanted to make a point that, hey, he was going to fulfill the law. The law was set there to be a guide. It wasn't be something to beat people over the head with. You know what? This Bible's not something to beat somebody over the head with. It's to love them and show them the way it is. You don't have to apologize for it, but let me tell you, it's about love and compassion. And he went over and touched the dead body. And they bare him stood still. And he said, young man, I say unto thee, arise. And I believe he sat up immediately. That'll happen sometimes when Jesus speaks directly to your situation. It'll fix it right then. And when he sat up and began to speak, I bet you there's no greater music to that mother's ears that she could ever heard. That was the most beautiful thing that she would ever hear was her son speak again, because he was dead, and now he's alive. Thank God that he come by and touched me one day, because I was dead, on my way to hell. And he come by and said, hey, son, you arise. I'm going to set you on the living side. I'm going to set you on the winning side. Or there's a song set you on the winning side, but let me tell you, that ain't right. It ain't the winning side, because if you're just winning, you might lose. I'm on the side that's already won. The ball game's over. I love sports, and I love it whenever it gets to the final outs made in a baseball game and my team's ahead. That's a good thing. Or the clock runs out and my team's ahead in football or basketball, because you've won at that point. Let me tell you right now, by the authority of Jesus, you've already won. If you're saved, you don't have to worry about it. There ain't no winning. We've already won. We're just waiting for the transformation to head out of here. And that leads me to this. The second part of this, verse 15. What a blessing that was with me when I was studying. And he that was dead sat up and began to speak, and he, being Jesus, delivered him to his mother. I believe he took him by the hand. Said, here, Mom, here's your son back. There's a far greater thing right here I'm fixing to get you. If you don't get anything else I've rambled on about tonight, for we believe that Jesus died and rose again. Even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. Everybody in here has got somebody that fell asleep on this side in Jesus. They died over here. But there's coming a day. Thank God there's coming a day when that loved one that you carried out to the graveyard, and the last time you got to see him was whenever they lowered that casket down in there and they covered it up with dirt. They wasn't there. They was at home with Jesus, because to be absent from this body is to be home with Jesus. But just like Jesus picked that young man up, carried him over there where Mom was, can you imagine what rejoicing that was whenever he did that? But there's coming a far greater. I'm hoping I'm still living whenever Jesus comes back. Because you know what? All those people that have passed away that we've cried a many a tear and we miss them so badly, when he comes back, them graves are going to burst open and the body's going to reunite. And let me tell you, that grandma, grandpa, that husband, that wife, that son, that daughter, whoever you've lost here on this side, Jesus is going to bring them right back. You know what he's going to do? I believe when we go out into the air, we're going to be reunited right there with whoever our family is, whoever we're missing the most. We're going to be right there, and I believe he's going to bring them right to us. I don't believe we're going to have to go hunting for them. I don't believe we're going to have to hunt for Frank. I think we're going to see him right there. And I don't believe you're going to have to hunt for your people that are gone. I believe he's going to bring them right there, and he's going to reunite you, because let me tell you, he says over there you'll be known as you're known. And let me tell you, you're going to know that, hey, your loved one's back. And you know what? You ought to rejoice in the fact that that's going to happen. And that's coming. It's just a matter of when. And let me tell you, I bless his good name, because he takes things that serious. He brings it right back there, and he restores all the fellowship, and he restores all the love, and he restores everything, because you're with him, and it'll be perfect forever and ever and ever, and will never depart again. I say bless his good name. He's worthy to be praised, if nothing else, and just because he cares about you this morning, or this afternoon, this evening. Because he'll work in all the situations. He'll work whenever you're lonely. He'll work whenever you're sad. He'll work in every situation, because you know what? He may already be walking towards you with the answer, and you don't even know he's coming right towards you. That widow had no idea. She just knew her son was dead. Now he's alive, and he restored back to there. We got to finish. Verse 16, and there was a fear on all. Let me tell you, it scared me to death. All of a sudden, we were walking down the road, and Jesus showed up, and he touched that, and he sat up and started talking. Maybe it wouldn't scare you, it scared me. But you know what? That's the awesomeness of our God, that he does things that we could not do. And he said they glorified God, saying that a great prophet is risen among us, and that God had visited his people. And this rumor of him went forth throughout all Judea and throughout the region round about. I'm thankful that Jesus will work in every situation. I'll give you two examples. We could spend the rest of the night here, and we wouldn't get through all of where Jesus works. But you know what? I don't know, I just can't get over, and I'd never paid attention to that where he delivered him to his mother, and how it parallels when Jesus brings all of our loved ones back that were saved, and we're reunited. To never ever part again. I'm glad that we've talked about it before, what's left outside the gates over there. No more sickness, no more suffering, no more wheelchairs, no more oxygen tanks. But you know what? No more separation from our loved ones, but also no more separation than being in the presence of Jesus and God. I can't wrap my mind around that. I can't wrap my mind around what heaven is. I can't wrap my mind around when there's no more burdens to carry, no more problems to have. I can't wrap my mind around that, because this day here, this life is, short and full of trouble. But I'm glad for the good days when he comes by and he just shows up and he squeezes you real good, and you know, hey, he's God. And I'm thankful that he's ready, willing, and able to work in every situation. You can't put anything out there that he can't work in, because there's nothing, in my mind, more impossible than somebody that's sick that's healed, or somebody that's dead that he brought back to life.